Hello and welcome once again to episode 29 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist Spencer.
Hey there.
And Ben.
Hey.
So before we get into our main topic, it's time for our Indie App Spotlight. So first up is Long Play by Adrian Schoenig, which is a wonderful iOS app for rediscovering your album collection. Long Play focuses on showing off your album art, whether in-app or in its widgets, and helps you rediscover the forgotten gems hiding in your library. Beloved by music lovers everywhere, Long Play tailors everything around your albums, whether you imported them from CDs yourself or subscribe to Apple Music. As long as you can access your music in the Music app, you can access it in Long Play. Long Play is only $3.99 as an upfront purchase, so be sure to support Adrian by downloading a copy today. Next, we have Money Flow by Daniel Romero, an iOS app centered around your spending habits and tracking them over time. Many things can be automated, but I very much like the idea of manually keeping your track of your expenses because it helps you identify when something is off as soon as balances don't match up. So MoneyFlow makes this easy by being a low-friction and well-designed app that integrates directly into your daily routine and helps keep yourself accountable. MoneyFlow is only $2.99 as an upfront purchase, so please be sure to give it a try and support Daniel. Finally, we have Proxyman by Nia Tran, a macOS, iOS, and Android app that provides you with a web proxy backed by powerful debugging features, enabling you to capture, inspect, and manipulate both HTTP and HTTPS traffic. Proxyman provides you with full controls to filter URLs, customize your workspace, and even set breakpoints and run scripts when certain requests are called. If you do any sort of web development or interact with a server over REST, Proxyman is a must-have. Proxyman is licensed on macOS and a subscription on iOS, so please check out their site at proxyman.io to support Nia and for more details. So all three of these apps, we have links in our show notes and in the description on the YouTube video, so please be sure to give them a try. If you are an indie developer, we want to hear from you. Please reach out to us on Twitter at CodeCompletion via DM so we can spotlight your app too. So on to our main topic. There's a whole lot of things happening in the news with regard to Basecamp, so we figured we might go through exactly what happened, so that way we can all learn and do better ourselves, right?
Yeah. I don't think it would be that difficult to do better than what they've done.
So, yeah, for real.
It's a pretty low bar. So to kind of just really give a quick recap, and there's a lot more here. Admittedly, I haven't even actually read sort of the canonical guide to what all happened, which is an article from The Verge. But just sort of seeing it play out on Twitter, I have more or less the gist of what happened. And basically, it kind of boils down to there was some discussion among the Basecamp employees that they wanted to engage in trying to understand how to support their disadvantaged or diverse sort of population of people who might not be white men that work at Basecamp. And they formed a DEI group, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I think is what that stands for, group to sort of try and understand those issues and bring them to the forefront and help everyone grow professionally within the organization. And the long and short of it is that basically that group was shut down shortly after it was formed, and then Basecamp for some reason decided to take something that was going to be a change to company policy and publish it on their blog, which I already don't understand why they would do that. This is essentially information that really is only relevant to their employees, and yet they're putting it on their blog, I suspect because Basecamp, the people of Basecamp, the principal, owners of Basecamp sort of consider themselves to be thought leaders in the space of running a company and company culture and all that stuff. They've literally written books about these ideas. So I'm assuming it's because they thought that they were doing something innovative and that they wanted to share that innovative company policy with the world, right? The downside, of course, of doing that is if you aren't doing a good job of that, then you just have kind of embarrassed yourself in front of the world. And certainly it's the case that it seems to most people that what they did was embarrassing, which is to say that politics and other non-work related topics are just things that they don't want their employees spending any time on during work hours discussing with each other. And they thought that they could create a policy where these things aren't going to be discussed, and then they'll all be more productive, I guess. If they're not busy talking about politics, then they're just doing more work. It's really unclear what they were trying to accomplish, because in my opinion, you can't control human behavior at a fundamental level, right? People are going to do what they're going to do, and not only can you not control it, but you probably shouldn't. It's probably not your place to do that as the owner of a company. All you really can ask is just that your people do good work, and that they try and stay focused on getting their work done. But kind of outside of that, it's not really your place to tell people what to think or how to act or what to say. You know, obviously there's sort of bounds there. Like, you don't want people to be outwardly, you know, mean or nasty or you know, even to the point of like being discriminatory or something, right? Where they're just sort of treating people terribly. That would be not good. But outside those bounds, people are going to do what they're going to do. So it just seemed odd that they would even attempt this. But the bottom line is they did attempt this, and then within, I don't know the timeline, but I believe they announced this new policy like on a Monday, something along those lines. And by Friday of that week, from what we can tell, about 30% of the company's employees have resigned over this problem that they were having with management, like on the spot. They offered these people, I guess, severance packages. Anybody didn't want to stick around, and about 30% of them at least took that severance. And it sounds like the severance and the sort of separation was immediate. They weren't like, oh, you know, 2 weeks notice or anything. It was just like, you're working there one day, and essentially the next day you're not working there, and you've taken the severance package. So they lost, from what we can tell, their entire iOS engineering team, their chief of design, and a whole bunch of other people, some of which had been there for over a decade. They had this, you know, humongous brain drain of people, including core Rails team members, who not only resigned from Basecamp, but also said they were no longer going to be part of the core Rails
maintaining
open source
maintaining
the open source project. So not only did Basecamp as a company lose out, but even sort of the community of people who use Rails lost out on some expertise of people that have been around for a very long time, and in some cases they've been, you know, were there from the beginning when DHH sort of first created Rails. They were there, and they were integral to making it the success that it was. They sort of, you know, tapped out of all of those things. So if nothing else, it's a good lesson in, you know, don't give people an ultimatum unless you are prepared for them to take it. Right? to take the offer. And then maybe don't try and dictate human behavior. Like, maybe know where you sit in the hierarchy of the control you wield over the people that you employ, and be reasonable. Because when you're not, this is what happens.
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I really, like, basically on purpose, mostly because of DHH, have steered clear from Basecamp and, you know, everything that even went on when there was that whole Hey thing last year. But if I remember right, part of it was that years ago, employees would keep a list of people that had, like, to them, funny sounding names, right?
Yes. In Basecamp, I believe.
In Basecamp, right, in their own software. And so it seems so much like a double standard, where when the company was smaller, I'm sure that people at a high level, I don't know about DHH, I don't really know him, but maybe, was in on that, right? And right. A part of that ridicule. So then them coming out and publishing this blog post that essentially, you know, they're not condoning such behavior of, you know, discrimination and everything. It seems like such a double standard to me, where, you know, it's like That's so much hypocrisy going on in just one single part of this whole, tornado of a mess of a dumpster fire that they're in. And
Not
it's
to
just
mention,
like,
not
Oh,
to
go
mention,
for it.
many employees did not even hear about the change in policy until that blog post came out. Like that was
Right.
Oh,
news
yeah.
to the people working there, just as it was news to everyone else.
Right.
And I feel like they may have sniffed out that this would be controversial, and they could get ahead of it by making it public. And that may have been
Yeah.
their game plan in making it public instead of private, and then it sneaking its way out, and just as like a whole bunch of things with Away and Slack. Like we've heard those stories before. So I think that may have been their game plan, but it was clearly very poorly thought out, because if it was going to be controversial, like they didn't really nail down why it was controversial and what the problems were, because basically if you silence what people like say at work, that works really well when you're at the top of society. It doesn't work so well when you're not. And I'm not saying like white men deserve to be at the top of society, but we are, and we need to be conscious of that, to be better people. And we can't ignore that fact. And it seems very much that they were trying to ignore that fact.
Yeah, and I mean, well, yeah, and for one, don't let your PR plan supersede the needs that your employees have, right? Like, don't
Yeah.
think, oh, this is going to be controversial, so we better release a blog post publicly so that we can get ahead of it. It's like, yeah, but then you're sacrificing the sort of integrity that you have with your own employees to give them the benefit of the doubt and let them know about things first, right? Like, of anything else, you should be communicating to your own employees first. They need to know this information way before anybody else does, even if that means that your PR plan kind of suffers because you have to release this information in stages, first internally and then whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the right thing to do is to tell your employees what's going on first. I heard that, like, on this, was it this past Friday? Was it just a couple days ago? I'm now.
Yeah, I think it was last week.
Okay. So I remember seeing on Twitter that they had an all hands meeting on Friday, and this is where that sort of ultimatum severance thing was offered. And that, from what it said, that the meeting was not amicable. It was a pretty contentious meeting between management and the sort of rank and file staff. And again, it's like, even when you have to deliver bad news to your employees, you need to do it with compassion and with thinking of them first, right? They are the people that are making your business happen.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, if you're the owner, like DHH and Jason Fried are, the people, again, I don't know much about the company, but from what I do understand, it sounds like they've managed to hold a decent portion of the ownership of the company, which therefore means that, the company has made them rich, which is fine. I have no problem with that at all. But like, especially if you're in a scenario where like these people are the ones making you rich, right? Like, maybe you owe them, I don't know, at least the decency to sort of be compassionate and to explain things to them in private before you explain them in public, so that they can get ahead of it, right? They can understand it and they can digest it and they can come to terms with it before potentially, like, reporters are reaching out to them and asking them for their opinion, like that. Like, it's just so, and in every place where I've worked, where and these are mostly at startups where, like, that kind of thing can happen. I mean, I normally I work at places that are boring, at least like to the press, and so I've never don't typically have this problem. But I have worked at a couple of startups, Lambda School being one of them, and they don't always get super positive press. And the communications team at Lambda School gave us sort of basic training on, like, if someone reaches out to you and they're a member of the press and they want your interview, please tell us about it. Like, don't, and then
Yeah.
if you're confused or worried or scared or whatever about what you're going to say, come to us and we'll help you to sort of build a PR plan so that you don't just like speak out of, like, just put things into the air and then be like embarrassed or worried or whatever, right? Like let's build a plan together so that we can all sort of speak with one voice, right? Like the company can all sound like we're all on the same page. And like that's what a company does when they care about this stuff, right? When they care about the way that the company is perceived publicly, and most importantly, I feel like in Lambda's case, they were doing that, in part to cover their own butts, right? They don't want people speaking out of turn, but also I do really feel, I got the vibe that they definitely really also didn't want to have us as employees be in like this weird position where we have to speak for the company and we feel really unprepared to do so, right? And like this, and this is the same problem here. It's like you owe, if nothing else, you owe the employees the sort of dignity of explaining it to them privately, helping them to understand, answering their questions, and working through it together as a group before it becomes public information. And whether the decision that you make is controversial or not, sometimes you have to make choices that are difficult. But like you owe it to them at a minimum to sort of, and it seems like they did this like the opposite. Like I just said, all the advice I just gave, they did exactly the opposite, which is like post it publicly first, literally let our employees find out about it on our blog, which is just so crappy. That's just such a terrible way to do things. And then when they get all angry about it, we have like a very contentious ultimatum meeting on Friday where we basically say, if you don't like it, get out. Yeah. We'll give you severance.
And I think it was made worse by the doubling down that DHH did multiple times, like between that public announcement and the ultimatum meeting, that really made people sour, because he basically said, as a very public speaking person about politics, that, it's okay if you do it on your personal blog, but we don't want it happening inside the company's communication channels.
Sure.
And that really pushes how much privilege that he has as someone with an audience, that he can say whatever he wants, but others that
on the company's blog as well.
Yeah, on the company's like it's his personal blog because he owns the company. Right. I don't know how else to put it.
Make no mistake, even on Twitter, he's speaking. I mean, unless you are totally unaware, even when he speaks as DHH on Twitter, he's still basically speaking for Basecamp. Like he's the owner of the company. It's like you can't. It's like once you're president, you kind of can't not.
You're the face of whatever.
Yeah, like the things that you say, even when they're said sort of out of context and in jest or like ad hoc, and like you don't really mean it to be an official communication, you're still speaking as that person, right? So the idea that like he's just chatting about stuff on Twitter personally, and that's different than like you talking to a colleague about it over Slack, is ridiculous. Like that, he's speaking for the company just as much as you would be speaking within the context of the company privately inside of Slack. Is like it's all the same thing.
Yeah. And what it all sort of reeks to me is like seeing your employees as employees rather than like humans first, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, everyone that I'm potentially letting go here has a family. They're going to have to find another job. They're going to have to figure out, where do I get my next job or whatever it is. It feels like there was no sympathy other than like maybe the base amount of like PR-ness that they had to do. And then there were
it's always the people like that. It's always like some super crazy religious homophobic congressman gets caught in a, bathroom somewhere doing something like homoerotic, right? It's like always the people that are just like the most staunchly in one camp then get found out to be sort of like hypocritically doing the opposite. And like these people have, Jason Fried and DHH have authored multiple books about how to run a company and how to treat your employees well. And like they famously paid, San Francisco wages no matter where you were. They were remote first, yada, yada, yada. And like and then at the end of the day, they basically, again, we don't know the full context because we're not employees of Basecamp and we don't want to say that we know everything about this. We certainly don't. But at least just from the stuff that has been made public, it seems pretty obvious they treated their employees like crap at the end of the day, right? Like like the chips are down. It's time to make a real decision. they treated them like crap,
or they were
and
protecting
that's-
the wrong employees.
or
Like
yeah,
the whole thing started with employees that found it funny that their customers like had a certain name, and like there's nothing funny about that. And the fact that that continued up until today, that's the most worrisome
Yeah.
thing. Like it has never truly gone punished.
Right.
You don't have to punish people by firing them and taking away their livelihood. You have to, however, punish them to prevent them from continuing the
Right.
bad behavior. And I think that's the mark that so many people, it's been made clear to, which is why they just left. They had integrity.
Right.
And there were two camps, one which like did not want to deal with this and one that was happy to deal with it. And the one that didn't want to deal with it, they left. And I feel extra bad.
And to be
for
clear, there are probably some employees that couldn't maybe afford to leave.
Yeah,
So
no,
we shouldn't
and
say
not
that
just
everyone that
afford.
stayed is right.
Yeah, so I was just about to say, it's not just those that couldn't afford to leave. There are people that, if you're on a visa, for instance, you can't leave.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, right.
are beholden to that company to stay in this country. And last I checked, it's not the greatest time to go traveling back and forth. And depending on where your family is, that might be a deadly mistake that
Yeah.
you can't do anything about. And guess what? You have to be quiet. You can't get fired. You have to fall in
right.
line, rank and file, to blend in as best as you can. And up until now, they had to be quiet, and now there's people that are leaving, so they're even fewer, which is
Right.
probably the worst case for those individuals.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a cascading problem, right? Because the people that can leave do, and then the people that are left behind just have to do more work, and that puts more stress on them. And then that means that there will be a second round of people leaving Basecamp because maybe they don't take this initial package that's offered, but they have to leave eventually because they're like, look, unfortunately I had to stay, and now it's gotten so bad because of the drain that happened, right? Like now the stress has sort of it's cracked me to the point that like I can't do it anymore. Like I have to leave. And so then those people leave, the second wave of people leave, and then now you have just a few people left, and then maybe there's been some churn, but that churn is people that are going to be brand new and aren't going to know yet what they're doing. And so, I've seen numbers like people are estimating that, it could be 60, 70% of people at Basecamp could have or will churn over the next, year or two. And then the problem is like most of the knowledge that you had as a company is gone. Like, and I don't just mean like I know how to code an iOS app, but like I know how the iOS apps that Basecamp makes work.
Yeah.
Like
Knowing
that
the
knowledge
code
is
base.
also gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
And
you can't get. There's no way to get that back instantly. Like that only comes back.
It's a
over,
lifetime of career that has just gone, and it's gone to another company. Like someone else is going to take advantage of that knowledge, and it's not going to be Basecamp ever again. And there isn't anyone with tons of experience that is now going to see Basecamp as a potential place to work because they are going to have seen all this. And unless they agree that such practices are the way to go, they're not going to necessarily apply nor want to be recruited. I mean, I don't know about either of you, but oftentimes I get emails from Facebook that are reaching out to recruit me to work at Facebook, and there is nothing they can do. No monetary amount, no way of massaging my shoulders that would make me want to work at Facebook. I am completely and utterly uninterested. I would prefer to become a farmer than work at Facebook. Not to say farming is a bad thing. It's just I would quit my career and do something else that I completely enjoy than to do that. And I feel like many people with a similar position, which is frankly one of privilege, they're not going to want to work there. So the only people that would fall for it are people with no experience or that are hungry to get some work. And they, like, again, I feel bad that they're going to be exposed to that company culture because clearly none of it is changing, right?
No. Yeah, I mean that
Like,
they basically that their memo or whatever you want to call it basically is a description of that, we like the way that we're operating and we're not going to change it, even if a majority of people that work for us don't agree with the policies that we have. It's like, too bad, right? We're in charge. We're not changing.
and maybe
Which
they
is
realized that after everyone took the severance package, right? They offered
A little
that
too late.
ultimatum as like, if you don't like it, please leave. They didn't.
right.
I don't think they realized at all that such a significant portion of their workforce would leave.
Yeah.
Which is I think especially funny considering that people like DHH pride themselves on knowing better than most, right? Like to the point of arrogance. What is good? What are the best practices? And like we're hopefully entering the beginning of the end of the pandemic, at least in the United States, because lots of people have been vaccinated, and we're hopefully headed towards a world where things are going to be kind of back to normal. And we've had over a year of remote work where people have really enjoyed that, in large part. And we've also got, generally speaking, a pretty good economy. And all those things, all of those metrics all mean that people who are talented and skilled are in a very good position to get a great job, and it's very much right now a buyer's market at least in the tech world. I'm not going to speak for other industries, but in the tech world right now, it's like a pretty good time to get a job, and especially if you got good skills, and and companies are realizing that maybe forcing me to do a 1.5 hour commute one way to work in some stuffy office building or whatever is not going to be much of a draw. Like, maybe we need to do better than that. And so companies, the good ones, are realizing that and are offering it. And so like, you'd think that someone like DHH would realize, if we do this, and if a decent number of our people leave, or that we say that you can leave if you want, like a decent number of them might do so, because like it's kind of a good time to get a new job, depending on what skills you have. And like this could actually be like a big problem for us, because it's a favorable market for that to happen anyway. We might even be experiencing a little bit of churn because of that. And then we put in this like trigger, right? This event that causes a mass exodus. Well, then we're really screwed. Like, you'd think that he would see that coming, but I mean, obviously he didn't, and they didn't,
Or didn't
as a group.
care.
Or they didn't care, which is even worse. Because at the end of the day, they're kind of just screwing themselves. As far as I know, Basecamp is a privately held company, and it is very centrally owned by a small group of people. So if you do this, all you're really doing is hurting your own business, and therefore hurting your literal pocketbook. Like your personal net worth is severely harmed by these actions. You'd think it's kind of like if you think of it from that cold perspective, it's almost like how, in the 2008 financial crisis, basically collectively as a world, right, as certainly as an American economy and even as a world economy, the people that were kind of watching all the levers and making sure people were doing what they're supposed to be doing, after it collapsed, one of the big takeaways was like, we honestly felt like this wouldn't have happened because we assumed that the people that were doing all this crazy gambling with all this money wouldn't be so reckless, because it literally will screw them over. Like it will ruin their own livelihoods. And so we thought that was going to be enough of a mitigating factor to prevent one of the most egregious like behaviors from taking place, because they would sort of have that self-preservation thing, right? And like, this is exactly the same thing. If you take all of the rest of it out and you just consider the cold, hard bottom line, you'd think that you wouldn't do this, because it's just going to ruin your own, like, your own prosperity. Like, even aside from all of the gross, inhumane things that went on here, like all the ways that you treated your fellow employees like crap, you think that even the money would be enough, but I guess not. Like, I guess it was either a gross misunderstanding, like not misunderstanding, but like a gross miscalculation, or it was a hubris filled, I don't care, get out, you don't deserve to be here anyway kind of feeling, which is also just terrible.
Yeah, and also I think possible for DHH. Like, I wouldn't say that would be a normal thing for most people, but from him maybe like an ego filled type thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
I did
really
see,
don't like him at all.
Out of all the terribleness, I did see one joke on Twitter that I thought was pretty funny. So like he was famously very much against, and I'm sure is still very much against, Apple's 30% cut that they take in the App Store, and that was a lot of what happened with the whole Hey thing. And it's just kind of funny that like they're not official, but like the estimates people have said, it sounds like about 30-ish% of the employee quit on that day. They took severance. That somebody made a joke like, well, how much DHH doesn't like losing 30%
Of
which
anything.
It's a crass joke because it's talking about people, but it is kind of funny. Like because he doesn't want to miss 30% of the App Store revenue, and I'm sure he's very much not happy that 30% of his company walked because of their sort of irresponsible behavior.
The deeper irony there, I think, is that he was arguing that Apple doesn't deserve the 30% because they didn't make Hey, and they aren't providing anything that props Hey up. They're just a storefront, basically.
Right.
And they could have marketed Hey completely on their own, and that was their argument that they made. And I believe just before all this went down, they were offering their employees 10% of the company's profits. Like, not each employee gets 10%, but the employees as a whole get to share that 10%. And the irony there is that the employees which built the product are only worth 10% of the profits of the company. And that, I believe, was right before this whole thing happened, which is not a good look, to say the least.
No. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't just do damage today, right, where they lose all these great people and all these technical resources and all this sort of collective knowledge. But then, like you said, right, like they have a black mark on them, right? Like in the sense that they're not, people are probably who have been following this are not going to be jumping at the chance necessarily to go work for them. And so they're going to have a recruiting problem. They're going to have a public perception problem. People are probably going to potentially boycott some of their products over this. Like a lot
of clients have started doing that. They started blacklisting their products because they don't want to be tied to it.
Yeah, concerns for probably, I mean, some of it will blow over because it's the news cycle, right? And the people forget. But like, and some people don't care. But I mean, I think it's going to be probably a small to moderate problem for their products, and I think it's going to be a moderate to high level problem for their ability to replace those resources that they lost. I mean, like I said, it seems like, I don't know if this is true because we don't have any confirmation, but it seems like most, if not all, of their iOS engineering team is gone. So Hey, the email app Hey, at least on iOS, and I don't actually know if they have an iOS client for Basecamp or not, but if they do, all of that, whatever they were going to do with those apps as far as an engineering roadmap is out the window. Like, because if they don't have anybody to do it,
anyone to teach the next generation of the next cohort of employees that come in to how that code base works. It's as good as dead code.
Yeah, and then even if they have like a show-stopping bug that they have to fix, they have to do a hot fix and patch it and get it in the App Store to update something that's critically broken. Even that is going to be very difficult to get done in any sort of reasonable amount of time. I mean, I guess you could, if you had to, you could hire a contractor, and if you can't find anybody in the U.S. that'll do it, you could probably find someone overseas that maybe hasn't heard of this controversy or doesn't care or whatever to come in and do it. But then, I mean, they're facing the same problems where they don't know the code base and they don't understand what's the nuances there, so it's gonna take some time and money, right, to for them to get sped up so they can do it. And if it's a critical bug, it's just broken until you resolve that. So it's got like problems today, problems tomorrow, problems in a month, problems in a year. Like, this is not just we screw this up and in a week no one will care anymore. Like, this is probably a couple year realignment of how their company's story will play out, and it could be severe. I mean, stuff like this happens, and then sometimes companies don't even survive
Yeah.
this, right? Like it could be that Basecamp won't even stick around as a company. I mean, who knows? Depends on what their runway looks like and how profitable they are, and how much this really will affect sales and all that. But companies have gone under, right, for less than this. So it's definitely possible that they don't survive it. And like, what kind of book sales are they going to have about, with their rework and all the rest of it if they're like, oh yeah, from the founders of Basecamp, which isn't a company anymore.
The retrospective will sell. Like,
Oh, yeah.
what went wrong, kind of thing. Everyone's going to be buying
true.
that because it's juicy drama.
That's true. Everybody loves drama, so yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And it's further reaching than just Basecamp. Like you alluded to this earlier, Ben, but anyone who works on a project that uses Ruby on Rails has now been tainted by the exact same onus that everything else has. And that is troublesome if your entire career is surrounding Ruby on Rails, because that's a big framework. For instance, if on iOS developers, y'all know UIKit. Imagine if UIKit was tainted by something like this. You don't have an expertise necessarily in anything else. That's all you know is UIKit. And you can't just go ahead and use something else. Like, everything is kind of interconnected into that with what you've built. And that goes the same for anyone that uses Ruby on Rails, which is a framework for the Ruby language, which was not invented by DHH. But it's one of the main web frameworks that allows you to build out a web application with Ruby nowadays.
Right. And I would argue, I don't know if this is true, but it seems reasonable to assume that probably the most important thing that people do with Ruby is to write Ruby on Rails applications, right? So yes, it is a language and it can be used for other things, but it's the vast majority of the time when it is used in some programming context, it's probably used in conjunction with Rails to make a web application. So just
like Swift is used for iOS and macOS development. Yes, you can write server-side stuff and scripts.
That's not
the majority of cases.
Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to mention, Ben, is you said basically how he should have had the foresight to kind of prevent this based on all of his experience and know-how. And it really reminded me of how very often, rich and successful people will say, oh, all you need to do is this, this, and this, and you will become just like me. And it goes to show you how much of their success is really based on circumstantial luck. Like, they were there at the right place at the right time with the right privilege to be able to succeed in that way. And unless you have all those things, which you will never be at that place in time again, it's gone past, you won't be successful like that. Now, with more money, you up your chances with regard to everything. But even with a huge amount of money, it's obvious that you can still take a nosedive for a stupid reason. All they had to do was step back by what they said early in the week, and this probably wouldn't have reached this point. They pushed because they believed this was the right thing to do from their point of view to protect their interests, but it didn't protect anyone else's interests, and this is kind of how it ended up. And we're all lay people by comparison, and we can see this. The writing was on the wall when this started, and they were blinded by that. Yeah,
I think I definitely am in support of the idea that companies should be able to be run the way that the people that run them think they should be run. I think that's fine. Right? We don't want to be in a scenario where the government is
clearly they're doing something right.
Circumstance. Yeah, right. I mean, we want autonomy, we want independence, we want independent thought so that cool, interesting things can be created, right? But at the same time, I also am a big fan of, if you screw up, then you reap the consequences of that screw up, right? So, for example, to call back to the whole 2008 financial crisis, I feel like as a society we did a crappy job of that because we basically nobody got in trouble. Nobody reaped any of those consequences in a negative way, really. I mean, some companies went out of business, but those people, I mean, basically we bailed everyone out. We didn't really learn anything. We didn't change any of the laws. We just kind of wow, that sucked. And then we just kind of like struggled for a few years as a society, and then we kind of got back to normal. And then now, like if you, there, you know, there's things about the economy that are the same and with a different name, and it's like this is going to happen again, right? And it's like it's without consequence, without negative consequence, humans don't learn. And I feel like if you're going to have this autonomy and this freedom and stuff, like if DHH is going to be able to just do whatever he wants, that's fine. But like when you make a boneheaded decision like this, then guess what? You get to you get to reap the crappy consequences that come from that, and that means you lose all of these probably, you know, decade-long colleagues and friends. And I mean, I'm sure that these people have lost friendships over this, and in addition to the just like human capital resources to the company itself, there's also, I'm sure, been personal relationships that have been seriously strained or broken. It's a significant event for the principal people of Basecamp and all of the employees that work there, potentially for a lifetime, right? Like it's potentially a life-altering event that just occurred to many people. Not just like, oh, I got to get a new job, but like, oh, this friend that I had for a decade that I work with, like we don't talk anymore because they were on the other side of this or what, like whatever. I'm just making things up, but like it's probably a life-altering event for some people, and it's all because we wanted to have funny sounding names in a spreadsheet. Like it doesn't make any sense. I mean, yeah, if you think somebody's name is funny in your own head, I guess that's fine, but like don't write it down, don't share it with your colleagues. Like that's wildly inappropriate.
Not to mention these are your customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That definitely reminds me of an Elon Musk type character. Of I'm the next supervillain, but
and then
doing good things, and I can do what I want, and the world is my oyster kind of thing. And
I mean, at least Elon Musk is trying to get us onto another planet. Like all the DHH is doing, from what I can see, is building a
planet filled with death.
Email client.
Nothing has survived there. Like I don't know if we want to go to that planet.
Hey, the
it will forever be.
The Perseverance rover was able to create oxygen just recently. They sent one of the little experiments on it is basically it takes, I'm going to get all this wrong, but it takes sort of the air that's in the atmosphere, what air there is, and it was able to actually extract O2, and then it produces, I think, carbon monoxide and something else as a byproduct. But yeah, and it's a tiny. I mean, the experiment is just an experiment, so it makes a tiny amount. But
you need a lot.
I know but it's a stepping stone. It's cool, and we flew a helicopter on another planet. That's cool. So anyway, we're digressing.
One thing this completely reminds me of in terms of boneheaded moves. That people keep doubling down on is to change topics a tiny bit is what's going on between Apple and Epic at the moment. The first trials were today as we record. And Apple is very much doubling down on this is the only way to run an app store, and a lot of dirty laundry is coming out. Yes. They would have been seen in a much better light if last WWDC they had done a little bit more than have the small business program and opened up a little bit of their control just to diffuse a lot of what's going on, because it doesn't look pretty. It's not a pretty look for Apple. A lot of their internal emails look at developers as like, of course they exist because of us, and that kind of haughty attitude. It's not a good look. And
supposedly a 72% profit margin on the App Store.
Yeah, that's all of that is necessary to run the store, right? And that's why it's a profit and not a break even kind of thing. Which means they're putting a whole lot of effort into making sure it's the highest of quality. which they're not.
Something that Jobs actually said initially that's what they were planning on doing, at least for a little while, was that they were basically going to break even on the App Store. Well, like when the App Store launched
on
in
top of
2008,
that,
he
it's
said
like
he made some comment publicly that said like we're
some
probably
some
gonna
people
roughly
did
break
see
even
the writing on the wall, and they
on running
formed
it.
that group of
Implying that
Privately,
they were
he
kind of
said-
doing
and then they shut that down. So they're sort of cultivating in the opposite
and
direction.
privately,
where
he basically said he didn't actually print Hello World.
Exactly. And so they're like sterilizing it in a way where they're losing all of those good thoughts and ideas of how to make the company better. And honestly, probably could have prevented this if they had, solved this internally and said, hey, you know what, let's get rid of this. Great. Instead, they said, oh, let's not get rid of the spreadsheet. Let's get rid of the group that's trying to fix this problem for us. Yeah. It's not like they weren't doing nothing. They were just doing something in a completely negative way. And when I'm saying they, I mean, the people in charge. I'm not saying, yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 It seems like, and I don't have a ton of experience in the industry and everything in different companies, but it's like we were talking about this. I can't remember exactly what we were talking about just between ourselves and our Slack, but it's the whole concept of I think good companies will ask for feedback from their employees, but ultimately I think a lot of tech companies especially are beholden to like VC money, and so they're like, oh, you know what, no matter what we as the employees on kind of the front lines do or say, and say, hey, you know what, it'd be awesome if we did this, right? Ultimately I think it's where the money is that they're going to go to for what should we do next. So even at companies that I think value employees probably get caught up in the, oh, hey, where's the money? Or people like DHH, I can see just having that ego and being, I'm going to do what I think is best because I've, like Dimitri and Ben said, I've written books on this, so I know best. And, that's one person's opinion and perspective. So, yeah. Hmm. Techno King and Mars. That was cool. I saw that. That's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah.
And that's why it's a
Right.
profit and not not a break even kind of thing. which means they're putting a whole lot of effort into making sure it's the highest of quality, which they're not.
Something that Jobs actually said initially that's what they were planning on doing, at least for a little while, was that they were basically going to break even on the App Store. Well, like when the App Store launched in 2008, he made some comment publicly that said like we're probably going to roughly break even on running it, implying that they were kind of doing it. Yeah.
And privately he basically said he doesn't want any apps to dirty the perfect experience that is running directly on device. And not saying that people are perfect or people shouldn't be idealized for having good ideas, but hopefully these opportunities give the next generation of developers that will eventually build up their own companies some food for thought and how to behave differently, and how to be more human about everything. Because ultimately, whether you're a business dealing with another business or dealing directly with customers, you're dealing with other people. They are not inferior to you. They are the same as you. And for all that Apple does to make things seem more equal, they also do a bunch of shitty things that kind of show that they think the opposite, which is very, very unfortunate.
I was just going to say, and it's interesting to see how everyone is responding to this whole situation with Epic. It's not just Epic that said, hey, we're going to lower it down to 12%, basically an 88% cut for the developers. But now I just saw a couple days ago or yesterday that Microsoft is going to do the exact same thing. So, people are... It's not like Epic is kind of just dying on this hill alone. Now, Microsoft, which is arguably the next biggest sort of app store with Xbox Live and everything that they have going on, and the Microsoft Store itself, they're like, yeah, you know what? Maybe it is time for a change. So,
did Microsoft announce that for Xbox, like for Xbox games?
I think
so.
So
they had it for the Windows Store for a while because they had to compete. There's plenty of alternate ways to get Windows apps, so they had to compete hard on the Windows Store to make it a viable platform as a marketplace. And incidentally, they didn't have to compete for Xbox, so you saw that they had this huge dichotomy in terms of what they were doing in one app store versus the other app store. And it's funny we use the term app store. Apple invented the app store. There were not a thing called apps, really. It was always software. And for the longest time on Macs, people used apps. So I think Apple does deserve to call their thing the app store. They really did pioneer a lot of that. And I think they also deserve to have full control over that. But they need to cede that control in different ways. And that's very important in terms of public perception, especially as it's falling apart. And I very much think Microsoft was doing that now to avoid the shots that are going to come at them next. Because
absolutely.
Google is next to be in the spotlight with regard to this. And Microsoft was stepping away from that and saying, we are not part of this. And we're going to do whatever we can to just be outside of that spotlight. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you look at all of the antitrust court cases that have gone on in the last year or so. I think there's been one that Apple's not been a part of, and then they didn't get caught in one of them, but they're in everything else. And then I think Microsoft wasn't in one of them, and so if they can at all avoid something like that, Microsoft that is, then yeah, I get that. Trying to save face, do it before they look bad. Good for them. I wish Apple would do that and just say, case closed, let's do it.
I mean, just like us, people said, no, this is bad behavior. So Microsoft said, okay, this is probably bad behavior. Let's not do this. It works for people. It works for companies, which in the United States are people. It goes all the way around, and bad behavior should be shunned. It shouldn't be canceled, as everyone likes to throw around with cancel culture. I don't think, unless it's egregious behavior, that we necessarily need to ruin someone's life for that. But it deserves when others kind of tell you to your face that that was not something that you should be doing. And if you don't listen
Right.
to that, then you aren't really growing as a person.
It needs to be looked at.
And
It needs to be kind of reconsidered or reevaluated.
And the boneheaded thing is that they have spent so much time digging their heels in, Apple in particular, over these ideas that eventually these problems are going to build enough steam and they're going to get just juicy enough for Congress in the United States to just get a hold of it and say, "Oh, well, now we need to flex our muscle and we need to stop this terrible behavior from happening," which personally speaking, I have no faith in anybody really in Congress to do the right thing. They're all a bunch of overpaid, fairly incompetent people who like to just stick their nose where it doesn't belong. At least that's my opinion. But like, all you do by waiting this long is you just eventually enough smoke builds around this that there's fire, and then Congress wants to stick their noses in and start to create law and regulation, and that doesn't usually work out well for the person they're pointing their litigation or their regulation gun at, right? Like that, you get all this new regulation. It's not necessarily, it usually, unfortunately, ends up helping the people that are the most entrenched, which is quite sad. But like, it's if they're focusing their ire at Apple, it's not going to be good for Apple, and they will no longer have control over changing the terms, right? It goes from, I get to decide what I'm willing to give up, right? Like maybe I'm going to give up a little bit more of the cut. Maybe I'm going to give up, I don't know, some, side loading or some other thing. But if someone else becomes in charge of what you give up, then you probably aren't going to like what they're going to tell you to give up. And especially if it's Congress, they have the force of law behind them. Like that, you can't ignore it. You have to do it, short of getting in legal trouble from them. So it just seems particularly short-sighted to say like, we're going to, obviously you don't want to just respond at the very first person who complains necessarily to change your whole policy, but like this has been a problem for people have been talking about this for a long time, and the cut and the side loading and all that stuff. I mean, I don't know which set of things is the right answer, the right compromise, but it seems pretty silly for a company that seems to pride itself on critical thought and on doing the right thing and on carefully considering all their options and being a company that moves forward with very clear purpose. I think that is true about Apple in general. It seems odd that they wouldn't take that same process and apply it to this. Like, eventually people are going to get pissed off enough that they're going to like go yell at their congressman, and then you have Josh Hawley running around making up things that don't make any sense, by the way.
Yeah,
and yet,
they have
like,
no domain knowledge at all.
But he's a
They have no idea what
congressman.
they're
Like he
talking
has a ridiculous amount of power, and he can make you do all kinds of stuff you don't want to do. Like, just do like.
I realistically can't see
Compromise.
Apple winning this. Like, there's no way that they get away with this long term. Like you said, or one of you said, the I forget what the program is called, but the small business
program.
that, right? Like, I agree that was totally a way to diffuse it, and maybe they do it one more time, but long term, even like short term, I don't think this is gonna pan out well for them.
And even if they don't lose the epic battle, right? Like even if they
Which
actually
it seems like
win
they
that
won't.
specific
it's just
They
gonna
will probably
continue
win that.
boiling. It'll just keep happening.
It's just going to keep, yeah.
And the stronger they dig their heels, the worse their argument looks,
Right.
because their argument is full of holes from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it was not based in any sort of evidence. It was, this is how we want to do it because it's going to make our product successful. Which, from a
Right.
business point of view, is not the wrong thing, but it becomes a problem when you have so much spotlight on you that other people's livelihoods depend on it.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's not individual developers that are ever going to benefit from any sort of discussion
No.
that happens. Apple should have learned this when they got in trouble with the government with ebooks, and Amazon came out unscathed. Meanwhile, the Apple bookstore, which was a tiny, tiny little business that was not doing anything really wrong. They were like not doing anything underhanded, certainly.
Right.
They lost. Because guess what? Amazon had prepaid everyone to follow their line of thought.
Right.
And they have
Right.
been prepaying everyone for years up until that point. They don't even sell
And of
books
the ones
anymore,
that were being
so it's not even a
naughty
thing.
in the ebook industry, it was Amazon. Like they were
Yeah.
the ones that were breaking
And
all
they
the
knew
rules
it,
and being
and they pre set up their plan to succeed. So
Yeah.
what happens when you have people that don't know your domain very well make decisions on your behalf? They follow whoever tells them how the domain should be run, which happens to be
Right.
whoever had paid them the most up until that point to
Right.
listen.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
it's not that they're taking a bribe; it's that they are taking some time to listen to a party in particular, and they are going to trust that party way more than any other party because they spent the most to get that time. That's all that it.
So for Apple's
comes
sake,
down
let's
to.
hope that their lobbying money has gone to good use.
And it probably hasn't. I doubt they
Probably
learned
not, yeah.
from any of that. Again, they're probably going to win the Epic case because Epic has a pretty loose case, and it is not in favor of any sort of third-party developer. It's purely Epic wanted to make more money, and they wanted to do so as selfishly as possible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again,
But the writing is
you're
even
running
more
a business.
on the wall.
That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
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 Like Apple is the crosshair is on them at this point. They've already lost the European antitrust case, which the fees are like $27 billion. Not a small amount of money. Again, is that enough to kind of tell Apple that they should do something in one way or another? A lot
No,
of that money is
because-
kind of stored away in Ireland that they'll never have access to. They'll probably just decide, okay, we lost that money.
Yeah.
We can't
Right.
we can't get access to it. But
Right.
it's not the best punishment, and therefore they're going to come up with a better punishment that last we checked, what GDPR caused is nasty pop-ups that happen on every single website. Like that was the fix for privacy is to make everything worse. So
Yes.
and that was fairly well thought out in terms of like how to adequately protect people, but it made things
Right.
worse. They didn't think of that part. And that's going to happen
Right.
every single time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, humans are really good at like finding ways around the rules.
It's like, how is Apple going to skirt this next? That's the next question.
Yeah.
and that reminds me of something someone said. Every time something bad happens, you can make a policy to prevent that bad thing. And all you end up with is a long list of policies at the very end of that, rather than trying to identify what caused that wrong thing. Fix it, but don't necessarily put a policy that prevents just that in the future, because all you end up with is a long list of weird rules that twist around each other, aka laws. And those laws, when there's just a handful of them, very easy to understand. When there's 2,000 of them, then you need a specialist to understand it, and guess who suffers? Those who can't afford the specialist. So that is going to happen in every circumstance, whether it's in a business, whether it's in a country,
a government, whatever it is,
And it's unfortunate that happens that way, but that's, again, like we've been saying, it's human nature, and the easiest way is to denounce such behavior as much as we can. So that's on all of us. Anytime we see something that we don't agree with, you need to stand up for it, whether you're standing up for someone else who can't, or you're standing up because you have the ability to. It's important that you do so, because if you don't, that behavior is just going to continue. So this week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Mystiko, an iMessage app for your iPhone that makes it easy to send your friends and family passwords, notes, documents, and other confidential information that you just don't want sticking around longer than it needs to. Are your parents asking for your Apple TV password yet again to log into iTunes on their Apple TV? Send them a Mystiko secure message. Mystiko secure messages are encrypted using AES-256 before being sent, and only the recipient will receive the key to decrypt them securely through iMessage. The catch? Once they decrypt the message, they won't be able to see it again once it's closed, making sure that what you sent them can't be seen a second time. Mystiko is available for both pay-per-use and as an auto-renewing subscription, so you only need to pay for what you use depending on how you use it, and comes with 10 free messages so you can give it a try. We want to thank Mystiko for sponsoring our show. Search for Mystiko, that's Mystiko, on the iMessage App Store today to give it a try. So with all that out of the way, it's time for Compiler Error, a segment where I get to test my fellow completionist's knowledge on Swift, Apple, and all things development. And today's compiler error is actually inspired by the recent Ask Me Anything that Underdog Devs did with Chris Latner. So that recording should come out soon, and I encourage all of you to listen to it because it was a great talk. All three of us were kind of lurking and asking questions as well, so it's yet another chance for you to see all of us if that is your thing. But with all that said, let me remember to record. But with all that said,
Nice.
We have that program recipes should not only generate valid output, but be easy to prepare and delicious. Statement number 2. LOL code brings coders back to the early days of memes with keywords such as hi, can has stdo, and k thanks bye, all phrases that may have come up as a caption for a lolcat image. Statement number 3. INTERCAL, short for Compiler Language with No Pronounceable Acronym, is an older parody language that satirizes aspects of the various programming languages of the time. And statement number 4. Inspired by a similar sounding language, Brain Fudge is a language that makes use of only 8 characters, the various characters at the top row of your keyboard, but otherwise uses the same syntax as its inspiration, Brainfuck. Not pronounced that way, but we are not an explicit podcast, so I'll leave it at that. So, Spencer, as our resident language expert that wants to stay in Swiftland as much as possible, I remember you saying that not too long ago. Why don't you go first?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'll start with the most likely. I think lol code definitely seems like something that someone made in like the early 2000s. I have no idea. The chef also seems pretty likely. I can see someone doing something like that. So I think it's down to 3 or 4 for me. Something tells me I have no idea. The chef also seems pretty likely. I can see someone doing something like that. So I think it's down to 3 or 4 for me. Something tells me that number 4 is probably, at least the original language is probably real. I don't know about Brain Fudge, but I think I'll go with I don't know. Yeah, I'll go with number 3. I've got no rhyme or reason for this one, but we'll go with number 3.
An excellent choice.
I hope so.
And Ben?
So I first want to say that these all sound fake. So I have no frame of reference to know if any of these
They
are
aren't
real.
very useful, I'll give you that.
Oh yeah.
But the really sort of mind-blowing thing is that 3 of them are real, because that's how this game works, right? Is that 3 of these things are true and 1 of them is false. So that is actually the most, I think, interesting part of this particular round of compiler error, is that 3 of these things are actually real. I'm going to follow Spencer in that I do think that lol code just sounds silly enough to be real. Chef also sounds ridiculous, but just this side of ridiculous enough to like that some kooky person would have thought that up and made it. So I'm just going to take those as being, enough of a meme language that like it exists. So then we're down to intercal, which I think is funny that you don't actually pronounce it as an acronym, even though it is pronounceable as an acronym because that's what it says in its description.
Yeah.
And it stands for Compiler Language with No Pronounceable Acronym. That's what it stands for.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Of course it does. So that it's an older parody language and it satirizes the aspects of the various languages that existed at the time. Again, that all sounds super plausible. Unlikely that anyone would bother with any of this, but like super plausible. And the last one, the whole brain fudge thing, like I've seen languages that are made up of a very tiny number of like usable characters, in many ways just to be funny or whatever. And like it's certainly possible that you could create a language like that. Again, not very useful, but possible. So unfortunately, they all sound like they could be real. I am going to say that brain fudge is the compiler error, and I'm making that decision because I feel like I go with 3 or 4, and I'm just like making sure that we have a spread of options.
All
Like
right.
because you pick 3, I'm picking 4, but there's, like you said, really no rhyme or reason to it.
An excellent choice as well. So let's go through them, starting with the ones that you agree on, which is number 1 and 2. So chef is a language designed to make a program look like a cooking recipe. And now, if such a hello world were written in this language, what do you think the recipe would make?
Maybe cookies because the world is round. I don't know.
That would have been a good one. One of the examples there is the Hello World souffle, which uses like
Okay.
160 eggs. Otherwise, it wouldn't actually print Hello World. But that is one such example, and this is a real language. It starts off with a description that what the program should do. There's a list of ingredients, and then there's a list of things that you need to do to kind of build up your recipe. Most of these do not build actual usable recipes, as you can surmise by needing 161 eggs for anything. But they always look like a recipe in the end, and hopefully they end up being something easy to prepare and delicious, as is one of the stated goals for the project. So this one is completely real, so good job not picking that one. Let's go on to number 2. So lol code is also a real esoteric language, and a hello world would look something like hi, Ken has std input output, and then I think it's validate hello world, and then okay thanks bye to end the program. So imagine putting your favorite little cat memes on each statement, and you have a programming language, as was invented by a bunch of people who wanted to have fun.
Well, that means that one of us is right.
One of you is right, yep. So Spencer, you thought number 3 is the compiler error, and this is for intercal, which is short for compiler language with no pronounceable acronym, which I am honestly not sure why intercal would stand for something like that, because this is an actual programming language that someone thought would have been a good idea, mostly to make fun of all the other programming languages with weird acronyms that ultimately didn't necessarily mean anything. So that's what they came up with, and that one is 100% real, which means I am sorry, Spencer, but excellent job,
Nice.
Ben, for detecting that number 4 is the compiler error. So brain fook, as I'm now gonna
See,
like
that is
to
the
say,
kind
of
is a
nerd
real
joke
programming
that is
language. It is
just-
composed of 8
just
characters.
perfect enough to
Most
be
of them
real.
are
Like,
brackets, pluses, and
Yeah.
minuses,
Like,
which makes the language
That's nerd
look
humor right there, and
very difficult
It's
to
not funny,
look at,
but it is
because
it is accurate.
it's just those characters. Any other characters are basically interpreted as comments, so you can comment your code, which is a good thing. But the rest of it is just, yeah, you're definitely going to need to. The rest of it is just garble. And the best thing I saw on the Wikipedia page is this language is referred to as a Turing tar pit. It can be used to write any program, but is not practical to do so. So that was a fun terminology that I learned in all of this. And that inspired, because none of those
Like
characters, if you've
Podmod
ever
or
read
something like
old
that?
comics, none of
Yeah,
those characters are
Podmods.
ever used when someone is like
5% of
screaming
you?
expletives in little thought bubbles. They always use the other punctuation characters. So I was inspired to invent brain fudge, which someone actually at least started as a programming language. There's no implementation on GitHub, but there are a few repos of someone like wanting to coin that. But I added my own twist by actually using all those symbols that would otherwise show up in those thought bubbles as the tokens for the language that would otherwise use the same syntax. So good job, Ben, for detecting that. I am sorry, Spencer. You
Bye.
got thwarted by compiler language with no pronounceable acronym, aka Intracal.
I'm gonna stop the recording. So podnods.com, that is the kind of nerd joke that is just perfect enough to be real. Like it's
Yeah.
like that's nerd humor right there, and it's not funny. Accurate.
Completion to know when new episodes get released. So, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released. And feel free to tweet at us if there's a topic you'd like us to dig into. More importantly, as a small podcast, be sure to rate us on iTunes / Apple Podcasts so that way more people can find us. And give it a star in Overcast if you use Overcast. And Ben, what was that other podcast player that we did not know existed?
Like Podnods or something like that?
Yeah, Podnods.
So if
Like
you're listening on
5% of
Podnods,
you?
please let us know what type of podcast player it is, because I've never heard of it. But it's cool that you are listening, and we encourage you to listen to our future episodes as well. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Ben, who is at Ferrousguy, that's FERROUSGUY on Twitter, and Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis, that's SPENCERCCURTIS on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buniol, that's DIMITRIBOUNIOL, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.